Thank you for tuning in to the ALMA 2020 Chat and Chew author interviews. I'm Rebecca Vanook, the Executive Director for Library Reads. One of the things I've missed most this year is getting to bring you fabulous author panels at live library conferences. I am grateful, however, that we've still managed to try and find a way to connect you with these great authors and their books. Special thanks goes to the Adult Library Marketing Association for inviting Library Reads to take part in these interviews. This is video 1 of 1 featuring fiction authors. Please feel free to reach out to the various library marketing teams for more information. You'll find those contacts on our website, libraryreads.org/resources. Thanks so much for joining us for these brief author chats. We hope you enjoy them. Brian Freeman is a New York Times best-selling author of psychological thrillers, including the Jonathan Stride and the Frost Easton series. His books have been sold in 46 countries and 22 languages. He is widely acclaimed for his You Are There settings and his complex, engaging characters and twist-filled plots. He has been selected as the author to continue Robert Ludlum's Jason Bourne series with a new Bourne novel released in July 2020. In his latest thriller, Funeral for a Friend, Jonathan Stride's best friend makes a shocking deathbed confession. He protected Stride by covering up a murder. Hours later, the police find a body with a bullet hole in its skull. Now Stride's longtime partner, Maggie, is forced to ask an uncomfortable question. Did you kill him? With suspicion in the murder pointed right at him, Stride finds himself off the case and on leave from the Duluth police. His only ally in clearing his name is his wife, Serena. The clues all point to a hot Duluth summer years earlier that everyone in town would prefer to forget. Someone was willing to kill rather than let those long ago secrets come out, and the suspect with the strongest motive is Stride. Hi, Brian. Thanks so much for talking to me today.
Absolutely. Thanks, Rebecca. It's great to talk to you.
Yeah, so I'd like to dive right in with your next book, which is Funeral for a Friend. It's out right now. Can you share with us a little bit of the storyline, the plot about this new book?
Yes, indeed. And in fact, I have my copy right here. You know, people who read my books know that I like to write thrillers that have an emotional core to them. And that's really what you're going to get in Funeral for a Friend. It's a very intense, personal story. Lieutenant Jonathan Stride of the Duluth Police, he's the hero in this. This is my 10th Jonathan Stride novel. And again, it's a very personal kind of story because as it starts out, Stride is dealing with the loss of his closest friend. And so right in chapter 1, he's sort of at Steve Garsky's deathbed, and Steve, his friend, makes a sort of shocking deathbed confession that turns Stride's whole world upside down. So in addition to the to the grief and loss that he's dealing with in terms of saying goodbye to his friend, he's also suddenly finding that there were secrets in the past that are changing sort of everything about his personal world and his professional world. So I've had readers writing to me, first of all saying that it's their favorite Stride novel yet, which I love,
awesome.
Particularly with so many books in the series, but that they've been, they've already been in tears by the end of chapter 1, and that's very special to me. I mean, it sounds strange when a thriller writer says, I'm always trying to go for that emotional response, but that's really the kind of thriller that I like to write. It should have that sort of intimate, personal feel to it.
It kind of sets it apart from other thrillers in the genre. So as you mentioned, this is the 10th book in your long-running Stride series. This goes back 15 years. Let's talk a little bit about Stride. So first of all, how have you kind of changed Stride in the 15 years? That's a long time to have a character. He has a whole backstory. He has a whole life. So how have you kind of changed him up a little bit? And do you ever have trouble coming up with new mysteries for him to solve? Have you ever thought like, oh no, he already did that back in book number 3? Or is there always something fresh for him to be onto?
Well, that's a great question, because I think that's one of the interesting challenges of a long-running series is how do you keep it, fresh and spontaneous for the reader? A lot of people will ask, do you have to read all the previous books first? Do you have to go
I
back
was going to
50
ask that. Yeah.
moral
What do
and
you
go all
tell
the way
them?
forward? But I write each Stride book like a standalone, so that
Okay.
you can dive right in. You're going to get a full, rich experience of the characters. And I always think about it from a standpoint of the fact that you're not going to just have friends that you met in your teens and your 20s. You're going to meet people throughout their lives, and if you meet them later in life, you're going to want to go back and discover more about their stories and the things that led them to that point in their lives. And I think a good series should work the same way. You ought to be able to dive into a series book at any point in the series, and then if you fall in love with that character, then you're going to want to go back and discover the stories that led them to that point. And Stride is a very different man in Funeral for a Friend than he was 15 years ago in my first book, Immoral. And that's because of all of the things that have happened to him and the people around him and the relationships along the way in all of those books. So he grows and changes along with the series. And I think that's really how you keep a series fresh. I mean, when I'm thinking about a new Stride novel, I'm literally looking at each of the series characters and kind of where they are in life, and thinking about what's kind of the next phase for them, and what needs to be happening to them, and what sort of things need to be resolved in their life. And in many cases, I really start building the plot around those things, as opposed to sort of trying to impose an outside mystery on it. So for example, in Funeral for a Friend, if you go all the way back to my very first book, Immoral, a lot of readers have actually have sort of forgotten about the fact that Stride had a second marriage after his wife Cindy had passed away. He married a woman named Andrea, a school teacher, and they had a spectacularly unsuccessful marriage for about 3 years in Immoral. And Andrea has not shown up as a character in any of the books since then. And I've always felt that was kind of an open part of the Stride series, that somehow I needed to go back and kind of close out that part of Stride's life. So in Funeral for a Friend, Andrea is now back as a major character in this book, and as a result, I think you get a chance to, again, new to the series, you get a chance to really understand who Stride is and sort of the complexities of his life. Because I never like to write about superheroes or supervillains. I like to create real people with real stories, and I want them to feel as if they're human beings and friends with all of the strengths and flaws that go along with that. And I think that's why readers end up connecting to someone like Stride. He's not a superhero. He's the kind of person that you want to get to know and appreciate the fact that like any other person, he's got strengths and weaknesses, and he makes mistakes.
Well, and that, that's, having read a lot of your books, I think that's one of the things you definitely have this real talent for, is writing real people. And that's, right. It's not just people are not just in it for the plot and not just for the mystery to be solved. It's for those people and those characters that you write. So, kudos to you on that. Do you do a lot of research for your books? I know a lot of them have settings where you have lived, so you try to keep things real, which I think readers really appreciate also. You use real places, real towns, real landmarks. Do you do a lot of research on your books, or is it just kind of, you live life, you absorb everything, and then it comes out in your books?
It's actually a little of both.
Okay.
Site research, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I really like to give readers kind of a you are there feel, as if they've been dropped down into every scene and they can hear it and taste it and touch it and smell it and feel it happening all around them. And so, a lot of that means going to the places where I want to set the book and finding just the right setting that sort of enriches the drama of what's going on in a particular chapter. And I think for people that know an area, that sort of adds a little extra fun when you're using places. I know exactly where that is. And of course, it's kind of cool even for readers who are around the country and around the world. They'll use Google Street View to kind of follow along with the book, which I think is just great. In terms of other research, it depends on the nature of the book and what I'm trying to do. Some books require more research than others. In Goodbye to the Dead, for example, there's a whole trial sequence and jury deliberations, and that was the kind of thing that since I'm not a lawyer, I really wanted to get that right. And a lot of times what happens is readers end up being great resources. One of my great fans is actually a Minnesota County attorney, and he was extraordinarily helpful in sharing trial transcripts with me, and he read early sections of the book to be able to make sure that I was kind of getting the trial sequences and the legal minutia right. And other books require either less research if it's sort of more of a psychological study, or the research may be very different. I mean, there may be things that are happening to a character, a medical condition or something like that I just kind of want to get correct. So it sort of varies depending on the nature of the book. I always think of research as something that it's easy to let it get in the way of the story. Sometimes as an author, you can sort of fall in love with the research that you do, and you want to pour all of these little details in there. And the trouble is that if it's not advancing the story, if it's not advancing the characters, you really sort of need to pull that out of there. And you also don't want readers to get stopped in their tracks and go, oh, wait a minute, that doesn't sound right. So it's that balancing act.
Very good. Okay. Let's talk about your fans for a minute, actually. So, let's talk about libraries and readers. So pre-COVID times, I know that you and your wife, Marcia, spent a lot of time traveling around the countries to libraries, bookstores, book groups. And I know that right now you've sort of switched over into doing Zoom and Facebook meetups to stay connected in this kind of crazy new world that we have. So I've always admired that about you, that you really have a special connection to your fans. Tell me a little bit about that, and how do you think that really informs your writing? I feel like as a reader, it makes me feel like you're an author who really cares about the person on the other side of that book. So tell us about that, what that means for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for both Marcia and I, we're really passionately committed to the idea of building relationships with our readers and reaching out to them and listening to them. I always encourage readers to send me emails, to post on my Facebook page, to get in touch with me and tell me what they think about the books. And there's so many advantages to that as an author. I mean, when you're listening to what readers say, you really get an understanding of the things in a book that appeal to them, and the kinds of things that they notice and pay attention to, and that affect them emotionally, and the kinds of stories and twists that work for them. And so for me as an author, that's really helpful. I mean, I get a sense of what it is about particular books that really sort of trigger the right reactions in a reader, and I'm able to kind of think about that then as I'm considering each book. And it's strange. I mean, but in these divided times, I will tell you one of the things I just love is that I will get comments from readers about my books, and they will come from people who have far left perspectives and far right perspectives, and their messages all are exactly the same. And Marcia and I were just talking about this the other day and saying, it really is meaningful, because what it tells you is when you start digging below the surface, we all have so much more in common than the things that divide us. And I think books are one of the great ways to discover that. So this year has been, really difficult for us in a lot of ways, because we haven't been able to get out and talk to readers. I mean, writing is such a introspective, solitary kind of profession. I'm sitting, spending hours in front of a computer most of my days. I always look forward to the opportunity to go out and, do library events, because that's me kind of having a chance to get in touch with real people again. Yeah. And we had, I think, 25, 30 library events scheduled in the early months of the year. And of course, they all ended up getting canceled. So we've done a lot of, Zoom events instead and things of that nature. And, there's good and the bad of that. I mean, obviously, it's not quite the same as connecting with people in person. And certainly it's particularly difficult, I think, when you're a speaker, because when you're talking to people, you derive so much of your energy from the audience. And
Absolutely.
So if you don't have the audience there, you're really kind of having to pull everything out of yourself. And it really is, it's much harder. It's much more exhausting. On the other side of it, it means, because of the scope of these online events, it means we've been able to bring in readers from around the country and even around the world who live in places that realistically we really never have a chance to visit in person. And so now suddenly we've got the chance to actually include them in events in a way that we wouldn't have been able to do in the past. So, for me and Marcia, we're very clear on the fact that even when we get to a point where we can start doing, in-person events again, which we, certainly look forward to, we're going to keep doing these sorts of virtual events because, again, we can reach out to people that otherwise we wouldn't be able to see.
Yeah, you get a whole new fan base, which is awesome. Or you get to talk to those fans that you have not ever before. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. All right. Well, so to wrap it up, so you have really, in this crazy year, you have enjoyed immense success, which is wonderful. I'm so happy for you. So you've got this new Stride book. You were selected to continue Robert Ludlum's Jason Bourne series, and the first of those new books came out to much acclaim this summer. You've got this great back catalog of books. So for newcomers to your work, where would you recommend that they start? I know you've already said that with the Stride series, you can pick one of them up and get right into it and then go back. Tell us, give us one of your titles that you think, hey, somebody who really wants to get the Brian Freeman experience, what book would you say, read this first and then read them all?
Well, that's a great question, honestly. And one of the things that I love about right now being so busy, and I mean, I'm writing 3 books this year. I wrote 3 books.
Amazing. Good for you. That's so awesome.
I'm and I'll probably do either 3 next year or I'll be institutionalized. I think it's still no question about that. But the good thing about it is they are so very different. And I think it means that readers can kind of pick something depending on the sorts of books they really enjoy. I mean, you look at something like my Bourne book and a Jason Bourne story is going to be, sort of much more adrenaline driven and, an action-based thriller, whereas a Stride novel, more of a police procedural and more intense and psychological. For years, people have been asking me, what's your favorite book? And I've always said that's really hard to pick because I love all the books for different reasons. I will say there are 2, and it's and of course I'm looking around and I've lost one of my books, but there's 2 books that I think are really close to my heart now, and a book called Thief River Falls came out earlier this year.
I just finished it a couple weeks ago, actually.
Good. Well, that's wonderful. Oh, well, here it is. I lost it because I wasn't actually looking in front of my face. So Thief River Falls came out earlier this year, and we've had an amazing run with that book. The Amazon charts folks actually just listed their top 10 best-selling thrillers of 2020 so far, and Thief River Falls was on the list, along with books by some names like Grisham and Coben and Baldacci and Stephen King and things like that. So that was amazing. So Thief River Falls it's a standalone thriller, so people can dive right in. It's an intensely emotional thriller with what Amazon called a jaw-dropping reveal. That's always the combination I'm looking for, is that incredible twist at the end, and yet also that deep emotional core to the book. Thief River Falls is a great place to start. The other place to start is my novel, The Deep, Deep Snow. It came out last year as an audio book original, and now starting next month, it'll be in paperback. It's in ebook right now. The Deep, Deep Snow is, it's not really a thriller. It's really more of a mystery, and it's got a female first-person narrative to it. So Shelby Lake, this young sheriff's deputy, is the narrator of the novel. And both The Deep, Deep Snow and Thief River Falls, I would call, I think, my 2 favorite books of anything I've done. So I would encourage folks, start with one of those and let me know how you like it. And after that, start exploring some of the different things I do. And again, for me, what's really exciting is doing so many different kinds of projects. And it's sort of like, if you've got a favorite actor, I mean, I hope you'll follow Tom Hanks, no matter what kind of role he may be in any given movie. I'm hoping readers have enjoy following me on that same kind of ride, and know that even if it's something very different from my other books, I'm hoping you're going to take something away that you'll really enjoy.
That's great. I'm sure they will. Well, we wish you much success with this new Stride novel and with all of your upcoming projects. That's so awesome to hear about. And thanks again for talking to me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Rachel Howzell Hall is the author of the acclaimed Lou Norton series, the standalone thriller They All Fall Down, and co-author of The Good Sister with James Patterson, which appeared in the New York Times best-selling anthology, The Family Lawyer. She is the Senior Development Officer for the Donor Relations Department at Cedars-Sinai. Currently, she serves on the board of directors for the Mystery Writers of America, is a member of Sisters in Crime, and has participated as a mentor in the Association of Writers and Writing Programs Writer to Writer program. In her latest thriller, And Now She's Gone, Isabel Lincoln is gone, but is she missing? It's up to Grayson Sykes to find her. Although she is reluctant to track down a woman who may not want to be found, Gray's search for Isabel becomes more complicated and dangerous with every new revelation about the woman's secrets and the truth she's hidden from her friends and family. Featuring two complicated women in a dangerous cat and mouse game, Hall's latest explores the nature of secrets and how violence and fear can lead you to abandon everything in order to survive.
All right. All right. Thank you so much for joining us today, Rachel. It is such a pleasure to have you here.
I am thrilled to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, sure. Our pleasure. So let's get right into talking about your great book, And Now She's Gone. Here it is. For the folks who haven't already read any of the amazing rave reviews of the book or heard anything about it, can you tell us a little bit about the story?
I would love to. So, And Now She's Gone follows new private investigator Grayson Sykes, who gets her first case. She's had a mini case before, and that's to find a missing Chihuahua named Cheeto. But now she gets her real people case, and her client is Dr. Ian O'Donnell, and he's looking for his missing girlfriend, Isabel Lincoln. To make matters worse, Isabel has absconded with his beloved Labradoodle, Kenny G. And so he wants, yes, to find his girlfriend, but also to find his dog. And, initially Gray thinks it's a pretty straightforward case. Get proof of life that Isabel's okay and bring the dog home. But when Isabel sends her a text pleading with her to let me be missing, Gray is kind of now reluctant because now there's some hints of some domestic violence, and Gray's not down with that. So she's trying to figure out, Gray is, as this new detective, how to search for someone who wants to be missing, while also trying to figure out what her life is going to be. She has some of a past, as we all do, and she's trying to figure out her future. So while she's chasing one woman, she's trying to figure out who she is at the same time. So cat and mouse game,
Yeah.
Story about discovery and about women and who we are and who we aren't. So it's kind of everything for me.
Yeah. And it's a page turner. I have to say, the reason I'm so excited to talk to you about it today is this is the first book I managed to finish after everything started in March. I kept picking up books and putting them down, and I couldn't concentrate on anything. I think a lot of people had this happen in the spring, and this was the first book where it's like, I've got to see oh my God, I've got to see, like, staying up late finishing it. So you'll always have a place in my heart for that. I love books, but it's such a page turner, and there's so many twists and turns, and I don't want to spoil anything for people who haven't read it yet, but I would love for you to talk about, did you sort of have it all mapped out as you started to write the book, or were you as surprised as a reader might be you figured out where the story was going? Or
so a part of the story I thought about writing and kind of started writing a long time ago, and that was the missing woman part. Back after my very first book, A Quiet Storm, I had this idea that I wanted to write a story about a woman who disappears, and it was called The Flight of Venus, named after one of Harry Houdini's magic tricks of making a woman disappear. But back then, I didn't know how to write it. And of course, it was rejected because I was a baby writer. And it wasn't until I wrote my procedurals, my Lou Norton books, that it's like, maybe I can make this into a PI looking for a woman who is, chasing shadows and phantoms. And that's when it became a story. And Yeah, so I wanted to wedge the procedural with the domestic suspense to kind of make, the engine go.
Yeah.
And it's worked out. And so
Yep.
basically, I wrote both stories kind of separately and then got out lots of 9 by 14, the legal size paper, and taped one into the next and
Oh,
plotted it all out very analog and
uh-huh.
inserted the flashbacks in a very, where should this go? Where should this go? To make it, the pace, to get the pace right.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
and I think that's one of the things that makes it so compulsively readable is like every time I thought I had got to a point where I was like, okay, at the end of this chapter, I'm gonna take a break, and then whew, bam, got hit out of nowhere. Like all of a sudden, there's like I was like, no, I can't stop reading now. So the pacing is incredible, and you're really, I mean, I think one thing that works so well about the book is you are tackling these really tough issues. I mean, like to write about domestic abuse, intimate partner violence, the way people keep secrets,
Yeah.
the way you don't really know necessarily what's happening behind in people's relationships. That's just such a hard thing to write about. How do you approach while you're trying to write this fast-paced book and have a fast,
Right.
and how do you approach such a sensitive topic at the same time?
Well, the topic always comes first. I only write about things that bother me and that I'm trying to figure out or that I've seen and I want to figure out for that person over there. And so it's always the idea first and then the chocolatey cover of it. So that meant me looking at family, that meant me looking at friends and the people across the street and all these relationships that are constantly surrounding me and how people deal with those secrets. I mean, the people who live down the hall or across the street from you, there's something going on with them that they don't want anyone to know about. And so I've always been fascinated by this veneer of formality and, oh, she looks great, but something's going on. I know it. And those those secrets are very serious. But what makes crime and mystery so compelling is everyone has these types of secrets, and yet we want to kind of be entertained when we peel them back. That's why there are thousands of CSIs and Law and Orders, because we can relate to this kind of thing. And so I'm committed to tackling these heavy ideas and making them so that people can step away from their own crazy life and see someone else's and
Mhm.
see how it's solved. And I don't want people to ever feel alone in their madness because, at least I may not be able to solve it for you, but you get to see how someone else solves that problem. So,
So that's part of the pull for writing a thriller for you. Part of the pull is to, in a weird way, even if you're writing about what seems like a fantastical situation, that people will see themselves mirrored in that book in some
yeah,
way. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I mean, especially with Gray, who's so new at being a PI. Now, all of us aren't going to be PIs, but we've all spilled coffee on our shirts before big interviews, or we've all had spinach leaf in our teeth when we're supposed to be fabulous and flawless, and we're off balance. I mean, I have a zit right here that you can't see, but it feels like it's an elephant on my face.
Yeah.
And so it weighs on, your psyche because you're
Mhm.
not as perfect as you want people to think you are. And so I wanted her to be like the cipher for that, so women can see, oh, I know how it feels to be with a jerk who's telling me what to do, or a coworker who thinks she knows so much more than me and she doesn't. I actually know a lot more than what I'm letting on to be. So I wanted,
Mhm.
for Gray to be that every woman
Mhm.
that we all are. Some, yeah.
Yeah, it seems like, overall there's been a real increase over the last few years in these sort of domestic thrillers like you're talking about that
Mhm.
have some kind of and a lot more female investigators or PIs. Do you think that's related to this idea of people looking for themselves in thrillers or in books? Where do you think that comes from?
I think so. I think as, especially with social media and we see people's so-called perfect lives on, social media, on Instagram, and everything's so perfect that we know it's a lie in some ways. I mean, I think about that murder case of, Oh, the so-called happy family in Colorado. There's a Netflix special on it right now, and he ended up killing his wife and dumping his two babies in an oil field or
Oh
something.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
that
that's,
guy.
oh, you just gave me the chills thinking about it.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
it's like
yeah.
before this though, she was constantly on Instagram and Facebook showing how perfect her life is, and her husband's plotting her murder. And she's not the only one. We unfortunately, many of us know people who may not kill their partners, but sure as hell smack them around or emotionally terrorize them or all these things. So I think social media drives a lot of what's happening now in terms of literature. We see these perfect lives and perfect dinners and perfect and vacations and all the rest of it,
Mhm.
and it's all a fiction.
Yeah,
And so, as writers, we're taking advantage of that and say,
yeah,
It's not so great."
yeah. Take it that next extra step. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So this book is set in LA.
Mhm.
Speaking of people pretending to be perfect,
Yep, yep.
and it's not your first book set in LA. So what about LA? I mean, I know you're from LA, but why is LA? It's a setting for you. It's setting for so many thrillers
Yeah,
and crime. What about LA? Do you think attracts people to write a thriller story set?
right. So for me, I am a native. I'm an Angelino, and I actually love this place. So I watch folks come to Los Angeles to be someone that they're not when they're in Iowa or Ohio or somewhere not, New York.
Hmm.
They think that LA means I wear a certain shoe and I wear a certain, thing, and I eat at this restaurant. And for me as a native, it's like, that's not LA at all. For me, LA is a small town. I know kind of people everywhere. And so I like setting stories in parts of the city that don't get as much attention as a Santa Monica or Beverly Hills. And I like um, setting stories where there are, people who are great pretenders. Either they've come for Hollywood or just to be here. And it makes a great place for both the artificial and the very real.
Hmm.
I wanted it because it's so big and it's so diverse, and there are lots of places to, hide people and hurt people and love people and feed people. I mean, I take a lot of time with food, the
Yeah,
food of Los Angeles,
yeah,
and so yeah, I wanted the smoggy skies that are actually beautiful but are killing you. I wanted the fires. I wanted all of it. LA offers so much, and it's so perfect and imperfect.
mhm,
And I see gray as perfect and imperfect. And she even talks about how everybody and no one knows you in Los Angeles.
yeah,
You're anonymous and you're not. And for someone who's trying to disappear, like Isabel Lincoln, and like this woman Gray used to know named Natalie Dixon, it's a perfect city for disappearing and reinventing yourself.
yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. And it's just such a great canvas for the story. The place really reflects the people.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what's next? What are you? Have you been able to write in this odd time? Are we going to
Yeah.
see Ray again? What do you think?
I have been able to, my day job is writing. I write for a large medical center out here in LA. And right on the weekend of March 13th, I, brought my computer home and was writing COVID crisis memos and proposals and all the rest of it for a very long time. And, my own writing kind of took a hit because I was just so tired. Up until this point, I was very proud of separating my novel writing life from my day job.
Mm.
And now here they were together in my house, and
Yeah,
it was hard,
you can't
and just
escape.
feeling, yeah. And, I'm a mom. My daughter's 16, so dealing with that, and I'm a wife, and, you know, helping him and just being scared in general of what's going on. But writing has always been a therapy for me, a place to get away, a
Mhm.
place to have some sense of control. So eventually I got my routine back. And so in that, I did write something else. And that story, These Toxic Things, will be coming out next August.
Ooh, very
Yeah.
exciting.
Yeah.
Great.
I'm very
Is it
excited about
inspired
it.
by these times at all, or is it from a story from the before times?
It's from the before time,
Okay.
but amped up by the craziness and all the weird things that people are doing to each other right now. And it's a story of a woman who's a digital archaeologist. She works for this company that curates memories into this little box, like an Alexa box. And she's working on the memories of a curiosity shop owner. But the curiosity shop owner winds up dead. And so the archaeologist, she continues writing these cute little narratives for this dead client's memory box. And there's something weird going on with these memories that she's curating. And there's something weird about her own family. So it's about family, it's about secrets, it's about memories and how none of it's for sure. And I'm so excited about it.
Oh
There are
my
even illustrations. I have illustrations in it. And so
Oh.
it's it's an odd, wonderful book. And I can't wait to share it with everybody.
Oh my gosh, I can't wait to read it.
Yeah. It's just pretty, I really like it.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Well, in the meantime, I encourage everybody watching to go pick up And Now She's Gone, which was just published in September, whatever time it is now. This book is available to read right now from your local library or to purchase at a bookstore. And thank you again so much for spending some time with us and telling us a little more.
Thank you for inviting me. I had a wonderful time. And thank you for watching.
Kim Powers is a 2-time Emmy winner and author of the novels Capote in Kansas and Dig 2 Graves, as well as the memoir, The History of Swimming. A Barnes & Noble Discover Award winner and Lambda Literary Award finalist for Best Memoir of the Year. Powers is the senior writer for ABC's 2020, part of the team that has received 3 consecutive Edward R. Murrow Awards. A native Texan, he received an MFA from the Yale School of Drama. In 2007, he was selected by Out magazine for the influential Out 100 list. Described as an unlikely love child of Mark Childers's Crazy in Alabama and Alice Sebold's The Lovely Bones, Rules for Being Dead pays homage to the movies of the 1960s and vividly conjures the machinations of small-town Texas with a wicked sense of humor and an unexpected tenderness. At the Downtown Theater and the local drive-in, movies feed the dreams and obsessions of 10-year-old Clark, who loves Audrey Hepburn, Elvis, his family, and the handsome boy in the projector booth. Then Clark loses his beloved mother, and no one will tell him how she died. No one will tell her either. She is floating above the trees and movie screens of McKinney, trapped between life and death, searching for a glimpse of her final moments on this earth. Clark must find the shattering truth which haunts this darkly humorous and incredibly moving novel.
Yeah, so why did you set it in 1960s McKinney, like such a small town setting?
It is, McKinney is very much the town, is literally the town I grew up in and lived in until the late 70s. And even though it's a work of fiction, it is very, it's autobiographical fiction. It's very much based on some real events in my real life, which took place in the 60s, and I could have changed it and made it, more recent, updated it, made it more hipper or whatever. But it's about a little boy who obsessively goes to the movies every weekend and sort of starts living in the fantasy world that those movies draw him into. And those very specific movies of the mid and late 60s were such a grab bag of stuff, from, horrible B movies, all the beach blanket movies and Frankie Avalon and Annette, to all the James Bond movies, to very grown-up movies like Alfie and Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, to a string of movie musicals like Camelot and My Fair Lady. And I went to see those no matter what was on every Saturday afternoon. Those were my babysitter. And through watching those movies, the little boy, the protagonist in my book, starts seeing what he thinks it means to be an adult and what adult life is in. And there is a mystery in his life a suspicious death. And he very much starts using what he sees in the movies, especially the James Bond movies, to play spy and start going after these culprits in his life. Yeah, so those, and I have such sense memories of this very specific theater in McKinney, which was the only movie theater there called the Ritz, which was anything but the Ritz. It was sort of on his last legs even then, with water stains on the walls and kind of ratty velour curtains and seats, where the springs were popping up out of the stuffing that you'd have to sit on. But it was sort of my home away from home, as well as the public library. Every Saturday was a trip, a double dipping trip to the local library and the movies. So.
Yeah, it's really great how you use the movies in there, not only the Ritz, but also the drive-in theater and like even the mother, because she's also a narrator, and like the book switches between those two viewpoints. And so if you could speak of like, that character is so funny, the humor that she has. If you could speak on why you included that other viewpoint for a character.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I should sort of back up and give you the overview of the book, and I can almost describe it two ways depending on which point of view I start with. But in essence, it's about a woman, middle-aged woman, a grade school teacher in the 60s, small town Texas, who wakes up one day and realizes she's dead. And I don't mean just emotionally dead and her life is going nowhere. I mean, she is literally dead. And she doesn't know how she got there. She doesn't know what happened to her. She sort of wakes up in this treehouse across the street from where she lived, and she sees two EMTs bringing a gurney with a body bag on it out of her house. And she realizes, oh my God, that's me. So she's sort of caught in this limbo land between life and death. I mean, and more between heaven and hell, trying to figure out what happened to her, and has a sense that she can't go on until she knows what happened. And sort of what is keeping her bound is her obsessive, fierce devotion to her two little boys who've been left behind, one of whom is named Clark, and he's 9, 10 years old, and a younger kid, Corey, who's 6. So I really wanted it to be this detective story that they both take on. The mother is trying to figure out what happened to her, and at the same time, the little boy, who at the same time, he loves all these movies, he loves true crime, he's checking out Truman Capote books at 10 years old, he's following, obsessed with the Kennedy assassination, with serial killers. He loves Nancy Drew, of course. He thinks he's going to be the male Nancy Drew, a hardy boy, and find out what happened. So he is down on Earth, and she's in this limbo land, still able to see him, but invisible. And they're on these sort of parallel tracks to find out what happened to her. And there's a suspicion going around that she killed herself. But then at a certain point, something new comes into the picture, and he starts wondering, did his very own father kill her? And is the killer in the house, my very own house? And he starts to find evidence that can support any, either side. It's interesting, the early drafts of the book were all told from the point of view of the little boy, of Clark. And they were 52 chapters, a chapter for this year, from the day his mother died on April Fool's Day, a year later. And some early readers read it and said, no bones about it, it is my childhood story. My mother died mysteriously on April Fool's Day when I was 9 years old. And a lot of whispers around me about what might have happened to her. And some early readers read it and said, so much about your mother, but your mother's almost the missing ingredient in it. Everybody's talking about her, but you need to go more inside her life. And I came up with this idea, in a split instant, to make her a character. Ghosts had been characters before.
Yeah.
The Lovely Bones is the greatest example. Susie Salmon narrating it from 14 years old. And I thought, what an incredible way into this book. And I've never really liked fantasy or or ghost stories. I didn't really view Creola, who was the mother's name, as a ghost, but there's a kind of heightened theatricality and a sort of magic realism to it by making her one of the narrators. And she, in trying to find out what happened to her at the very end, of course, has to relive some of her life and remember it. So in an odd way, it was letting me have this kind of conversation with my own mother, with letting me bring my mother back alive. Because I was so young when she died, I really didn't have that many memories of her, and kind of create this mother I wanted, this sort of funny mother who almost like sees into the future as well. You know, she sees these little glimpses of things called like Facebook and emojis and, you know, rolling in my coffin laughing, these acronyms. And she has to sort of make sense of it, you know, but she gets to watch her little boys down on earth, you know. So she is the character I think a lot of people have fallen in love with in this book. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really great characters. And I liked how you talked about like who you were inspired by. Is there any other books that you were inspired by? Like you mentioned The Lovely Bones, and of course movies of the
Lovely
time.
Bones is you know, a book I loved. You know, early on when we were sort of pitching this book to publishers, we said it's sort of The Lovely Bones meets The Curious Incident of the Dog in Nighttime. And, you know, that was also this huge book, you know, which was told from the point of view of a little boy who is autistic or has Asperger's to some degree. And it's his solving a mystery, you know, trying to make sense of these very adult things he doesn't really understand. So those were some tent poles for it. But it also has sort of a flavor of Larry McMurtry's The Last Picture Show, especially since these movies are so important to this kid. And it's this sort of small town. It's not quite the tumbleweed town that Archer City is in The Last Picture Show, but it has a flavor of that. But it also is very, you touched on it a little bit, it's so humorous. And this dead mother who's remembering so many horrific things has this very strange and surreal sense of humor about it. And it's, somebody said it's almost like, you know, The Lovely Bones and Shirley Jackson, who wrote The Haunting of Hill House, meets Fanny Flagg. And I love that because I worship Fanny Flagg. You know, she's this great Southern, you know, storyteller, and wrote Fried Green Tomatoes. So it's like everything is kind of deep fried in it. You know, Texas is not quite Fanny Flagg South, but, you know, close relative to it. So I thought that was great. You know, and Mark Childress, you know, the wonderful Southern writer, Mark Childress, who wrote Crazy in Alabama. There's sort of a whiff of him in it, you know, but I think it's all its own by the end of the day, you know. And those are all writers I love and whose books I love just on their own, as well as, you know, the bits of them feeding into my book.
Okay. So it's also a little towards the end, but it's also a little bit of Clark's first crush in there. And so I was just kind of wondering, like the movies and like even the dad is kind of moving on. And so I was wondering about the kind of like the theatricality that you mentioned earlier. Sorry, that's like one of those words that really gets me. I read it all the time, but I can't quite say it. But yeah,
that's okay.
The theatricality and the romance of watching movies too.
Yeah, I mean, it is a very, you know, romantic thing to go into this dark room and sort of lose yourself to the lives of these characters up on screen. And in the book, you see that the mother very much had that, you know, especially, you know, her movies were, you know, Tammy, Tell Me True. And, you know, she talks about that Debbie Reynolds movie being the first movie she goes on a date with her soon-to-be husband. And she sort of brings that love of movies, passes it on to her kids. And it's both a love of movies and it's a little bit, you know, a way of escaping into movies as well. And there's a healthy aspect to it. And, you know, a little bit of an escapist fantasy aspect to it. But, you know, the book in some strange way is more an LGBT book than any of my others. You know, I'd written a first memoir called The History of Swimming, that this is sort of a relative to. I didn't want to go back and do another memoir and try to solve this mystery of my mother's death. Was it in fact suicide, or was she killed by my father, or did something else happen? Because I wanted, to just be able to get into Creola's mind and stuff. But by presenting this little kid who so clearly loves escapism, he loves the movies, he wants to be an actor, he's in a little movie in the course of the book, he's in a community theater production of Peter Pan. You sort of see this kind of leaning he has, and he sort of develops a crush on the boy who plays John to his Michael in the Peter Pan. And then bit by bit, he develops a crush on the high school boy, the older man who is running the projection booth at the Ritz. It's just, a little innocent crush, but it's like this little boy, Clark, trying to kind of show off and, be older than he is and impress this older kid. And at the same time, the father, whose name is L.E., initials L.E. from Lloyd Edwin, he goes through his own romance. And one of the suspicions about the murder is that he's dating a new woman who becomes Clark's stepmother, and that he wants to get rid of Creola so he can marry Rita, the new woman, the other woman. But movies even play a part in their courtship, because there's a sort of key moment where he's sort of courting Rita, and he takes them all to see the special engagement showing of My Fair Lady. And it's like the only movie that the father ever has seen. He's all about business and how can you make money, and he sort of falls in love with the magic. He falls under the spell of My Fair Lady. And so the movies sort of weave their spell over all the kids. And at the very end of the book, and this was like very significant to me as well, the very last movie that Clark sees a year after all these events happen is, you're way too young to know what this movie is, but there's this infamous early Raquel Welch movie.
Oh, I do.
1 million years BC. And she's essentially the only woman in it, running around in, a fur bikini, chasing, cavemen and dinosaurs and being chased by them. And it's the sort of end of, this wistful coming of age, because Clark says, oh, I can't go to the movies anymore. He realizes that it's now time to be a grown-up. He's sort of out-aged the movies a little bit. And originally there was another aspect of the book that we weren't able to kind of follow through. But originally the book was going to have all these movie ads in. Those are very much, as in the same way that Clark creates a little scrapbook by cutting out movie ads of the movies he sees during that year. I did that too. It was a way to kind of get through my grief. I wish I had that. Who knew, decades later, that would be such an archival thing in my life. It disappeared somewhere, in the millions of moves I've made since then. But I did that as well. And originally we were going to do these ads at the end of each chapter. And then it seemed like a little bit of a cheap shot, like a gimmick that the book really didn't need in a way. And I think that was good. But the movies are very much, a through line of this book. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you so much for spending time talking with us today about your book. And I wish you a lot of success. It's really fun, and it really keeps you involved with the mystery.
Oh, Michelle, as one Texan to another, I appreciate those words. Thank you so much. I had a great time talking to all of you at Library Reads today. Thank you.
Anna North's journalistic work currently focuses on reproductive health and the politics thereof. She is also the author of 3 novels, Outlawed, America Pacifica, and The Life and Death of Sophie Stark. She is currently a senior reporter at Vox and has previously been a writer and editor at the New York Times, Salon, BuzzFeed, and Jezebel. North graduated from the Iowa Writers' Workshop in 2009. Featuring an irresistibly no-nonsense, courageous, and determined heroine, Outlawed dusts off the myth of the Old West and reignites the glimmering promise of the frontier with an entirely new set of feminist stakes. After a year of marriage and no pregnancy, in a town where barren women are routinely hanged as witches, young Ada's survival depends on leaving behind everything she knows. She joins up with the notorious Hole in the Wall gang, a band of outlaws led by a preacher turned robber known as the Kid. Charismatic, grandiose, and mercurial, the Kid is determined to create a safe haven for outcast women. But to make this dream a reality, the gang hatches a treacherous plan that may get them all killed. And Ada must decide whether she's willing to risk her life for the possibility of a new kind of future for them all. North has crafted a pulse-racing, page-turning saga about the search for hope in the wake of death and for truth in a climate of small-mindedness and fear.
Hi, Anna. It's a pleasure to be here with you and talking about your forthcoming book, Outlawed. Westerns have always been one of my very favorite genres, even though it seems as if they dip in and out of the spotlight, the literary spotlight. But this story of a young woman who can't bear children and leaves home to avoid an accusation of witchcraft, which brings with it a penalty of death, that just felt so real to me while I was reading it. And I wanted to ask you to tell us a little bit more about your book and where the historical fact might have been informed by any, or where the historical fiction might have been informed by any historical fact.
Yeah, I mean, I actually did more research. Thank you so much, by the way. Thanks for having me. Thank you so much for your kind words about the book. It's so nice. But yeah, this book I actually really did more research for than for either of my previous books, even though it's not, you know, exactly as you say, it's not exactly set in our reality. But yeah, I had to learn a lot about the real history of the American West in order to do this, and also you know, about the real history sort of various kinds of oppression and the ways that people's reproductive lives have sort of been used to variously stigmatize and isolate them. But you know, I mean, an original sort of inspiration for this was actually I was traveling in New Hampshire and I visited a Shaker dwelling, and so the Shakers, you know, were a separatist group. They lived apart from society and they chose not to have children or marry, and that sort of got me thinking about the ways that American society and really, you know, societies globally have put such an emphasis on reproduction and put such an emphasis on marriage and the family and children. And I sort of kept playing with that idea even as the story kind of moved west, and as I thought about separatists and outlaws and people who, you know, are separate not on purpose, but because they've been ostracized. So those were some of the threads that went into it.
What are you hoping people take away from reading this book? Because it seems like it's ideal book club fodder to me.
Yeah, I mean, I think a couple things. Obviously, there are, you know, a lot of serious issues that come up in the book, issues about infertility, about stigma, racism, eugenics. You know, those are all, you know, hard things and difficult to talk about, and I had a hard time talking about them even in the book. But I also, you know, part of the fun of playing with genre, you know, like a Western, is that it's supposed to be fun, right? I mean, Westerns are, you know, like they're shoot 'em ups. And this isn't exactly a shoot 'em up in that way, but I wanted to have fun and I wanted to tell, you know, an exciting story and a journey and something that would pull people along. So it's really, you know, even though there are elements, I think, to this book that are, you know, could feel dystopian, it is this alternate history. It's an alternate history that in some ways is, you know, is worse than our real history. In some ways, it's not as bad, or not as bad in some ways as our present. You know, but I wanted to edge away from straight dystopia, and I really wanted to present something that's, you know, that's not miserable and that has elements of just excitement. And so even as I hope people kind of use this and look at our real history and look at our present, I want it to be like also an enjoyable, good time for people.
I had that sense while I was reading it. And I was wondering, where'd you get the inspiration for this novel? It's not like your previous works.
No, it's not. And I mean, so I mentioned a kind of a moving west. So, you know, I went to New Hampshire. I was thinking about the Shakers. I was thinking about, you know, groups who have lived apart, right? And the sort of, you know, what it means to live out in the woods in the wilderness, who has done that, and has it been a choice, has it been forced? And I started thinking about outlaws, people who lived, like this book is based in a very loose way on the story of the Hole in the Wall gang, and that was a real gang of outlaws, and they really lived at the Hole in the Wall in Wyoming, which is a real place that I visited. And they were outlaws for a number of reasons. But I think I think what clicked for me when thinking about this book was it really was the Western setting. So I'm thinking, turning over in my head these ideas of separation, these ideas of ostracism, these ideas of outlaws, and I started just thinking about different Westerns and different stories. And one thing that I kind of came upon is that a lot of times the story of the Western is it's like a place, the American West is this place where the rules don't apply, right? You go off, you can make something of yourself. It's even the Western states were interesting for women. I mean, for white women in particular, they got the right to vote in some of the Western states before they could vote elsewhere. But then also those freedoms weren't for everyone, right? The American West is also a site of colonialism. It's a place where people's land was stolen from out from under them. So this frontier, this place where the old rules didn't apply, but new rules were sort of being imposed on people. I think those were kind of some of the tensions that got me sort of thinking in this vein. And then too, just the physical landscapes of the West really inspired me. I'm from California. I've lived here in New York for 10 years now. And it's been a strange year because I usually would go back to California and see my family with some regularity. I haven't been back, obviously since all this started. And so, but the book, of course, was written, long before 2020, but certainly was written with a certain homesickness in mind, and a missing of some of those landscapes and some of the wide open spaces. And so I think that is part of the inspiration too.
Had you always known you were going to go with the Western genre? Because it would have been so easy to fold the story into a fantasy or science fiction genre. And it's rare that ideas like this one in your book wind up in a Western. I'm very grateful because I love to see new Westerns, and Westerns will also pull reader attention because we don't see very many. You don't see very many really good Westerns that make you think. So I'm wondering did you always have Western as a genre in mind?
Yeah, I mean, I think I did sort of, one thing that excited me about trying it is that I didn't see a ton of them, or I didn't see as many that were sort of revisionist in a certain way. It's actually been really exciting. Since the book was finished, we've seen a number of really exciting sort of revisionist Westerns, or, maybe takes on the Western. I'm thinking of How Much of These Cells is Gold, I think there are a number of others that are sort of in development, even like Westworld, the TV show. I really debated whether I should watch it while I was writing the book, because I was like, is it going to prejudice me? But then I watched it and it's hardly a Western at all, but it does play with those tropes in a way that's really fun. But yeah, I mean, I think when I very, very first started writing the book, it was actually set in New Hampshire. It was set, in the woods in the Northeast. And I was having a lot of trouble with it. And it's when I sort of realized, wait, this is a Western, that it kind of came alive. And definitely part of it for me was the excitement of, this is a genre that maybe hasn't been played with in this way. I've written a more science fiction type book before, and some of my tastes in pop culture would traditionally run more to the sci-fi side. So for me, this was like a cool way to try something new.
I was looking over some of your pieces over on Vox, and I wanted to thank you for the piece you wrote on the 19th Amendment. I have added that to a resource list that we created here at the Kansas City Public Library. But I was wondering, how does your journalism and your areas of reporting expertise influence your fiction writing?
Sure. I mean, thanks so much for reading my journalism, by the way. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think those sort of cross-pollinations are always kind of below the surface a little bit. I don't necessarily consciously set out to write fiction that is informed by my journalism or vice versa. But I think especially with this book, there was a lot of influence just in terms of like the things that I end up knowing about for my journalistic work really can end up informing my fiction. I cover reproductive health and the politics of reproductive health a lot. And so, that was certainly on my mind as I wrote this book about someone who's infertile and who's ostracized for being infertile. And in the book, Ada, the main character, is the daughter of a midwife, and she's an apprentice midwife herself. And I, know a fair amount about midwifery and the history of midwifery from my work, from my journalistic work. And so even before I started doing research, I sort of knew roughly, well, what would it look like to be a midwife in 1830, 1850, 1890, and then I was able to kind of fill in the gaps. But in some ways too, I think, it's similar general interests that have informed my journalism and my fiction writing. It's interests in people's civil rights and people's freedoms and the ways in which those have variously been infringed upon over time. I think, those are general driving forces, I think, in both kind of strands of my career.
I've seen that in the list of things you've been writing about. I won't ask you about your pieces on Ruth Bader Ginsburg, but they were terrific.
Thank you.
Some people might think that writers have enjoyed having to quarantine all this time to focus on your writing. Have you felt any shifts in how or what you write due to the pandemic? Has it been a blessing in disguise or something else entirely?
I mean, for me, and I think I probably speak for a lot of people with kids right now, the biggest determination of my work during the pandemic has been whether I have childcare or not. Right now, my son has been able to go back to daycare, so we'll see how long that lasts. For the first 4.5 months or so, we had him home, and he's 2, and so I was not getting a lot of anything done beyond the bare minimum to stay employed. But I think the interesting thing that, even just in thinking about getting back to fiction again, the interesting thing for me has been that it's hard to think about writing anything set in the present right now, at least for me, because I don't even know what the present looks like day to day. Like, what's tomorrow going to look like? Every day the news is, upending what I thought the day before. So to write, it used to be possible to think about okay, I'm going to set this book in the present day world, and there are certain present day concerns that the characters would have, and you had a sort of perhaps static or slowly shifting sense of what those concerns would be, and that's just out the window. So I had, or I would say right before this pandemic really started, I had an idea for maybe a next project that would have been set, in 2020. It had a lot to do with ideas around climate change. I haven't been able to really work on it at all because 2020 is so different from what I thought it would be. And instead, whenever I even think about fiction, I tend to think about another project that is set in a much more speculative reality that's not the same as our current reality, because all those imaginary realities, they haven't changed as much. So that's, if anything, that's what it's done for me, is sort of just put a pause on the present where I feel like I can't write about it, which isn't necessarily bad because it has me reevaluating, what do I know about what contemporary life looks like around the world, and maybe that will be helpful in the long run.
And that leads me to ask you one final question. Do you think if writers set a story before the pandemic, will we have to consider that historical fiction, even though we lived through that? And is it science fiction if authors try to write 5 years a little bit into the future?
It's a really interesting question. I mean, there are books coming out now that are set, sort of in a present or in a 2019 or a 2020. And I think, the way they read depends a lot on sort of the timelessness of their themes. I think there are books right now that are being really well received because even though maybe they're set in a world before the pandemic, they, speak to really timeless things, right? And I don't know, there are other things, even I was thinking about just like watching TV, for example. Like, I don't know if you have this experience. Now when I watch TV, even if it's like set in the 1960s and somebody walks into a party, I'm like, no, no, oh no, no, so dangerous. Don't do that. You can't go to a party. Um, so there is this way that, you know, when we consume art now, we're like wearing our 2020 goggles. And it's going to be really interesting I do think we're going to get a lot of sort of, you know, art of the pandemic that's going to be very focused on it. And it'll be interesting to see what that looks like. And then I don't know, I'm excited for the sort of literary scholars of the future, or maybe excited or scared for people to look back at like 2019 through 2026 or whatever, 2029, and see like, how did literature change? How did writers' concerns change? It's such an interesting question. I don't know the answer, but I'm interested to find out.
It feels like we're in the middle of a big change and shift in literature, and we just don't know where it's going to unfold. So.
It's a lot. I mean, you know, I haven't done this, but it would be interesting to look back right around 1918, you know, and look at the flu from that year and how, if at all, that influenced people's writing. I don't know historically how quickly things went back to quote unquote normal after that, but that would be the only thing I could think to really compare it to.
That would be interesting to look at. Well, Anna, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us about your book. I can see it becoming a book club favorite, as I mentioned earlier, and best of luck with it and for the rest of your work.
Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Thanks.
Stuart Turton is a freelance journalist who lives in West London with his wife and daughter. He is the author of the international bestseller, The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle, which, among many accolades, won the Costa First Novel Award and was a #1 Library Reads pick. His latest novel, The Devil in the Dark Water, features murder on the high seas, a remarkable detective duo, and a demon who may or may not exist. It's 1634, and Samuel Pepys, the world's greatest detective, is being transported to Amsterdam to be executed. Traveling with him is his loyal bodyguard, Errant Hayes, who is determined to prove his friend innocent. But no sooner are they out to sea than devilry begins to blight the voyage. A twice-dead leper stalks the decks. Strange symbols appear on the sails. Livestock is slaughtered. And then 3 passengers are marked for death, including Samuel. Hi, Stuart. Thank you so much for talking with me this morning.
Hello. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. And especially thank you for waking up early so we can do this.
Yeah, not a problem. So I'd like to dive right into your newest book, The Devil in the Dark Water. So that publishes here in the States October 6th. And could you share a little bit with us sort of the plot about your new book? Tell our listeners what the new book is about.
I sure will. Can I just first check, was dive into Devil in Dark Water a pun? Was it intended?
Oh, I didn't even do that on purpose, no.
It's already going swimmingly well. This is
so
what
clever,
we'll do.
and I don't even try.
It's see, now I'm defeated on the puns. I was peppered them through all the way through, but I don't need to do it anymore. I've got you on the other side. This is, oh my God. So my first book, The 7.5 Deaths, I had the perfect elevator pitch for that one. And this one I've really struggled with. So at the moment I'm going with, it's set in 1634, and it's about a Sherlock Holmes style investigator on a haunted boat. So this boat sets out to sea, and it's leaving Jakarta, and it's going all the way to Amsterdam, which is an 8-month voyage. And they set out to sea, and mysterious things start to happen. It looks like there's a demon on board. And our Sherlock Holmes style investigator is on board, so he can work out who's doing it, except he's a prisoner, so he can't do anything. So he's locked away in the bowels of the ship, and we don't know what he's done. So it's left to his Watson sidekick to take over the mystery in his stead and try and solve it and save everybody aboard. And the longer he dithers, the more terrifying things become, and the more spooky and supernatural, and the more the demon grows in strength. So there's a ton of stuff going on, but it's hopefully really, really fun. That was my aim with this one.
I love it. I love it. So you referenced your first book, 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle, and I wanted to ask about that. So that was this kind of contemporary Groundhog Day meets Agatha Christie is how it's been described style mystery. So this book is a decidedly different setting.
Hmm.
We're in, 1634, is it 38?
60.
And it's, we're heading to Amsterdam, we're on a ship. What prompted you? Where did those details come from? Did you think to yourself, okay, I would like to write a historical mystery, and then did you decide on the time period, or did this just kind of come to you? Give us a little bit of insight into this process of this very richly detailed and very different plot.
Thank you. Thank you for using the word process, because that makes me sound far more ordered than I actually am. This is just a maelstrom that's happening here. It's just chaos all the time. It started off, a little bit started because I wrote 7.5 Deaths and it nearly killed me. And I didn't want to write the 8.5 Deaths or the 9.5 Deaths. I didn't want to become that guy. I didn't want to be trapped into writing time loop sci-fi.
That would be a nice long series you could do,
Yeah, and then just by the end of it, I'd just be lying on the floor, just writing like this, So I kind of felt that I'd done everything I could do with that concept and mashing those genres together. I really enjoyed it, but I don't ever want to write the same book twice, ever. So there'll never be a sequel to that one. There'll never be a sequel to this one. I'm always going to write standalones because that's just what I like to do. For me, the primary thing is to sit down and enjoy my life. Every single day, I just want to sit down at my computer and enjoy what I'm doing. Because this is not the most natural thing for me to be doing, right? I like being outside. I like being in the sun and hiking and swimming and climbing and doing all these, playing with my daughter. Sitting down at a computer for 8 hours and bashing out books is like far down the list of things I would have chosen for myself. So I've got to make it as fun as possible when I'm doing it. So that was the first thing. It was like, so what's the next thing that I'm going to find entertaining for 2 years? Because that's how long it takes me to write a book.
Okay.
And then I had this idea. So when I was 23, I'm 40 now, to put this in perspective. I know I look 68, but I'm 40. And as I was trolleying around Australia when I was 23, and I came across this maritime museum in Perth, and I started reading up about this horrible, horrible shipwreck called the Batavia. It got wrecked off the coast of Australia in 1629. And it should have been kind of a fairly standard shipwreck story, if that makes sense. But what happened was the captain took off on this amazing voyage to get help. And unbeknownst to him, he left the passengers and crew in the care of a sociopath, possibly history's first recorded sociopath. And he proceeded to sort of murder 125 of them before the captain got back with help. It's a really brutal story. But within it are these other amazing stories. So there was a soldier on board who kind of led the resistance. He managed to build a fort on a second island, and he fought running battles with the mutineers and with this sociopath, and he saved as many passengers as he could. The captain's voyage to go and get help is this remarkable, because this is the age of sail, 1629. All they had was stars for navigation, and he somehow managed to get himself from an island in a patch of water where they had no idea where they were, and he managed to get himself to Indonesia and get help and bring it back, even remember the way back and get back. Remarkable stories, but all anybody really remembers is this sociopath murdering these people. And that just, as you can imagine, it's a horrible, but it stuck with me. All these years, that story just stuck with me. And when I started thinking about a setting and what I'd like to write about next, it was that. But I didn't want to write that. It's too horrible. I don't want people to finish one of my books and just feel like they've been scooped out from the inside out. I want people to kind of bounce away or go away thoughtful. I don't want people to ever go away from one of my books sad. So I changed it all up. So I took the setting, I took the boat, I took the period, I took some of the character names and even some of their traits, but then I stuck this Sherlock Holmes mystery right in the center of it, just shoved it right in there. And I wanted to play with the Sherlock Holmes archetype and that sort of mystery style, deductive mysteries. So I shoved all that in there, and then I shoved some romance in there and just kept going until this book was kind of built.
Very cool. So the bulk of the people watching this will be librarians.
Hello.
Right? They always want to know, especially with something like this, and especially since this sort of comes from a true story. How did you do your research for this? Did you read up on this event? Did you do historical research into the time periods? Tell us a little bit about that part of the writing process.
Oh, the research part. So as I alluded to earlier, my favorite bit of the book is when I'm the most active, and that's research and planning. So before I start writing a word in my book, I take 3 months and I just research and plan. And it was before the pandemic. So I was able to, I traveled out to Indonesia and I wandered around kind of what would have been like the start of this book. Yeah. So Well, I used to be a travel writer as well, so any excuse to travel for me is I take it. So we went out there and we did that. They've rebuilt the boat that was wrecked, in which this is all based upon. They've rebuilt that in Amsterdam in a little port called Lelystad. You can go and walk, and they did it using the original materials and the original techniques, and they sail it out occasionally, so it all works. It's all there. So I went to Amsterdam and I walked around the boat for 2 days and took notes, and a lot of the sense of claustrophobia that's in the book comes from that trip, because when I'm 6'2", and this boat is built for like 4 foot people, I swear, I spent all of it walking around in a hunch, just unable to sort of like, just, you can't get comfortable anywhere on the boat. So I just tried to get all of that in there. And I bugged a lot of people who were on the boat and who worked there about how this would have sailed and what you would need to do to get it out of the harbour and to keep it going. And I had to go and read up on celestial navigation. So we've got an amazing maritime museum in London called in Greenwich. So I was in there a lot, and then I went and sat in the British Library. So for everybody who lives near London, around London, the British Library is our home away from home, because a lot of freelancers use it, a lot of authors sit in there and work, and then of course you've just got this wealth of reference materials. So I'd go in there and I'd ask the librarians, can you just give me some, like, I need shipping records from like, the 16th and 17th centuries, and they would just bring back stacks, or they would send me over to the microfiche. And yeah, so day after day, and a lot of the names in the book come from that research. They come from these were actual people sailing on these actual boats in this actual period. And I have, unfortunately, fictionalized their account and made it far more horrible than the real one probably would have been.
Well, that's very cool. I think that like having that sort of research that goes into it really gives the book a lot of heft. It's not just because the next thing I was going to ask was that, so both of your books are kind of this very fantasy in the highest sense, because they're filled with all sorts of impossible things that you managed to make plausible. And it sounds like that's not, that it's not just a fact that you are talented as a writer, it's that you do this kind of background research as well. Like, I think people will really be interested to know that you've used real names, and this is a real ship, and you've been on the ship, and you get the sense of how it felt to be on that ship. Like, that's really, really exciting. So thanks for sharing that tidbit with us. I know people like that.
Well, I think the only way it's a very strange thing. You've got to do your research so you know which bits of your research you can throw away in a strange way. Because obviously in this ship, like, there's moments at the back of the boat, the back of the book, I have a note and it says, an apology to history and boats. And that is because I did all my research, but then anything that got in the way of my plot, up to a point, I had to sort of remove or push into the background. So for example, there's only a ship this size would have been run by about 90 people, like crew, like actual senior officers, and I've got about 4, because at the same time as being a boat novel, this is a murder mystery novel. So everyone you encounter has to be a suspect in the plot. It's one of the interesting things we're trying to mix genres up. Like my Agatha Christie, my 7 Deaths novel, 7.5, sorry, for the US, my first novel. That was supposed to be, it's a gigantic party, and it's supposed to have like 90 or 100 people at that party, but you only ever meet about 12 to 16 of them. Again, it's just these things. You've got to be able to say, right, okay, there's the research. This is what I absolutely need to make this convincing, but here's what I can shuffle off into the background, because this isn't Master and Commander. That's not what we're doing for the readers here.
That's right. You don't want a whole big set of giant books going along. Everybody's a suspect.
Oh my God, they're all of you 130,000 words. Imagine if I pursued that course, you'd still be reading it. It would never be finished. I would have to just give it to people and then just carry on writing.
Yes, right. Just that's all you'd ever do. So to sort of wrap up, so is this kind of imaginative fantasy, is this the kind of thing that you like to read as a reader? Can you tell us a little bit about why? Is this? I know your previous career is travel writing, which is very also imaginative but extremely real, right? There's a big difference between reporting and writing fiction. So can you tell us a little bit about how you sort of slid into this imaginative writing, and is that the kind of thing that you like to read yourself?
No, I mean, it's funny because we make patterns, right? As people, we look at our history and we make a pattern out of it. I like to read currently literary fiction. I read quite a bit of literary fiction, but it's always, I like the beauty of language. I like books that mess with the structure of a story. So my first novel, I think, did that quite a bit. The structure of it was quite unusual. And I took that from the things I love. I loved reading Agatha Christie novels when I was a child, and then that moved on to Sherlock Holmes after that. So I read all of those books back to back over about 4 years. So I absolutely loved those series. But then I drifted away. I drifted through Stephen King and then horror, and then into literary fiction through things like Salman Rushdie and Arundhati Roy and these sorts of authors. So what I'm doing now, I think it's some combination of those being the first books I loved, the Agatha Christie, the Sherlock Holmes, but then married to the structure and the beauty of language, which I enjoy reading now. And it's some sort of odd combination of those two things. So really, talk about like genre bending and messing with genres. It's those two styles actually that I mostly are fixated on, the sort of getting a murder mystery and then wrapping it in these other things that don't, I won't say not commonly go with it, but it's like to get a beauty of language in there. It's actually quite a difficult thing when you just need to keep your plot moving.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is an odd journey because it's everything I write, I want it to be beautiful. I want the language to be evocative and the scenery and the setting to be evocative. I want the characters to be characters who could pop up in a piece of literary fiction. I don't want them just to be people to be murdered or people to solve the murder. I want them to have depth, and I want you to either feel attached to them or hate them, but at least feel that they're fully rounded and that you could like bits of them and hate other bits of them. So yeah, that's quite a tricky thing to do sometimes. I guess that's why my books take ages to write.
Well, you do a very wonderful job with it. I think that from the plots to the characters, there's an awful lot to enjoy in your books. So thank you very much for spending time talking to me about those books. Again, The Devil and the Dark Water, by the time this airs, actually will be out here in the States. So of course, wish you much success with it. Your first novel was a smash, award-winning. So we're hoping the best for this one as well. So thank you so much.